All right, so it's 7:02. We're going to go ahead and get started. I know a few more folks registered, but we're going to get started here. And so I will unmute my video. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm excited to talk with you more about the undergraduate and graduate adventure program with the Mount Washington Observatory. I have some slides and some information that we'll go through here, and then there'll certainly be some time at the end for some questions. So keep track of those as we go through the slides. And if you do have any questions for me, happy to answer those at the end. But before we jump into it, I'll just introduce myself real quick. So my name is Mike Carmen. I'm the Summit Weather Operations Manager for the Mount Washington Observatory. A little bit about my background. I was a Summit Weather Observer for about 10 years, working and living and working on top of Mount Washington. I left the observatory a few years back, but I just recently returned in this new role as Summit Weather Operations Manager. And I'm excited to talk about this program with you this evening. I have experience with meteorology, experience with, of course, the observatory, but also experience in STEM education. So I'm excited to combine those things and present this program here to you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can go through the slides that I have prepared. Wow. All right, there we go. Okay, so undergraduate and graduate adventure programs. So this is the sort of the outline of what we're going to go through this evening. So we'll start with some intros. I'm going to first start off by talking a little bit more about the observatory for those of you who may not be as familiar with our operations and how we run things, just sort of how the organization is structured, or Mount Washington itself. So we'll talk a little bit about Mount Washington and the observatory before we jump into talking about the program specifically. But that's where we're going to spend most of our time this evening, is talking about those undergraduate and graduate adventure programs. So I'll introduce those, and then we'll sort of move on to really digging into the nitty-gritty of those programs, talk about the overall goals, and then talk a little bit about the structure, the framework we're sort of working within, the different options we can offer, and what availability looks like for this program, knowing, we have our operating schedule, you have your school operating schedule and semesters and whatnot. So we'll talk a little bit about how those things may fit together. And then at the end, I have some suggested sort of action items and next steps, depending on after, we go through this webinar, where you land as far as how interested you may be and what your next steps might look like. I do have some suggested next steps for you there, depending on how you're feeling and at the end of the evening here, and then we'll jump into a Q&A session at the end. So there will be opportunity for you to ask any questions that may come up or you may have already come with that I don't answer during the webinar here. So definitely take note of those, jot those down as we go along, and I'd be happy to answer those at the end. Great. Well, we'll start off just again, like I said, talking about the observatory itself. So Mount Washington Observatory, we are a private nonprofit organization, and our mission is pretty multifaceted, but it really is centered around the operation of the Mountaintop Weather Station. So we are located on top of Mount Washington at an elevation just shy of 6,300 feet. We're a constantly manned weather station, so we're staffed 24/7, 365 days a year. And we have weather observers up there even right now, taking weather observations every hour, monitoring the weather, monitoring conditions, acquiring and quality checking a meteorological data set. And that's one of the things that we're really excited to really start to dig more into is that meteorological data set, which goes all the way back to 1935. So pretty long-standing data set now, 90 years on the summit. And that's a great amount of data that's a very high quality that can be used for lots of different research purposes, which we've gotten into more and more, certainly in the last decade or so. And we have a lot of staff expertise within the observatory as well in lots of different disciplines and areas, whether it be data collection and analysis. Obviously, the instrumentation that's used to collect this data has to stand up to some pretty harsh and extreme conditions, which we'll get into those in a few moments, what that actually looks like. So we've tested some state-of-the-art instrumentation on top of Mount Washington. Our staff and our observers are well versed in maintenance, but also troubleshooting. Also, maybe doing some post-mortem when instruments do succumb to the elements. So that's something we have some expertise in there. Obviously, operational weather forecasting as well. Our observers are forecasting for the higher summits of the White Mountains twice daily, as well as the state of New Hampshire. And also research. We have many research projects sort of ongoing. We have a lot of connections in the research realm with different universities and other organizational partners. Education, our educational wing of our mission has grown tremendously in the last decade as well. So we do have educators on staff too. And then obviously external communication of all of these components of our mission, whether it's just communication of the weather and our weather forecasts, with through broadcasting. There's a lot, obviously, of nuance that goes into that. So a lot of heavy expertise in a relatively small organization. And if you may not know where Mount Washington is, again, depending on your background knowledge that you're coming in with, so just a little primer for you here. We are located in the White Mountain National Forest in northern New Hampshire. We're the highest peak of the most prominent range of the White Mountains. And as you can see from this little schematic here, we're relatively accessible compared to the extremeness of our environment. If you compare Mount Washington's weather to similar environments around the world, ours is much more accessible, generally speaking, compared to, how remote it can seem on top of Mount Washington. So, only a few hour drive from major metro areas like Boston, Montreal, days drive from New York City and Philadelphia. So I think that positions us to be pretty unique in our accessibility. So a little bit more about the mission of the observatory here. So really, it's just to advance the understanding of the natural systems that create Earth's weather and climate. And we carry out that mission. Like I said, it's very multifaceted. But there's sort of four different realms in which we carry out our mission. The mountaintop weather station and the maintenance of that and the upkeep of that is really the primary one. Um, but that in and of itself encompasses a lot of different things. Obviously, it's our hourly manual weather observations. Our observers are going outside manually every hour and taking those observations. Around the clock data collection data is constantly flowing into the summit station from the summit and also from surrounding weather stations as well. Quality checking of that data. So a lot of data is coming in. We have systems and processes, manual and automated, that allow us to check that data for quality. Uh, weather forecasting in the higher terrain and for the valleys as well is also what our weather observers are doing. And we're communicating and broadcasting that information through radio, through television interviews, through a lot of different means. And instrumentation maintenance, I talked about a little bit already, and product testing as well. So testing some state-of-the-art instrumentation, but also testing things from different types of gear to even household appliances. There's a lot of different aspects to maintaining that mountaintop weather station. Our innovative science education programs as well, we have a long history of high quality interactive educational programs across many different age groups for Mount Washington. So this is why this program right now, we're really excited to expand more into the undergraduate and graduate realm. Weather and climate research, again, with this wonderful data set that we have, that's a lot of opportunity to really lead the charge with some innovative weather and climate research. What effects are climate change, or what effects is climate change having on in our alpine environment? We have data to examine those sorts of things, and that research is ongoing. Researching things like lapse rates, snow to liquid ratios, wind gust factors. We're all well positioned to do that. And then there's a lot of history in this area, so interpreting the heritage of the Mount Washington region, we've also kind of ingested that as part of our mission as well. But we're going to dig more into the weather aspect, of course, of our mission for the sake of this program. And so again, just to put some specifics, I keep talking about the extreme weather on Mount Washington. So to put some specifics on it, again, if you want to know more, you can check out our website if you want to know more, even more than this. But yeah, these are some weather averages that you'll see. Of course, we're a incredibly windy location, incredibly cold location on average. We see a lot of snow, about 282 inches of snow is an average snowfall year for us. And we see a lot of foggy days as well. We're in the fog about 60% of the year on top of Mount Washington. And a lot of cold and a lot of fog leads to a lot of rime ice. And rime ice is really one of those things that keeps us on our toes and is really one of the primary reasons why the weather station is manned 24/7. Is extreme weather, but specifically rime ice can really wreak havoc on all of our instrumentation. It takes some meticulous maintenance to guard against it. And we talk about our averages, but we also like to talk about our extremes, of course, as well. Mount Washington is one of our primary claims to fame is our maximum recorded wind speed of 231 miles per hour back in 1934, which was a world record at the time. The warmest it's ever gotten on Mount Washington, only 72 degrees. We spent a lot more time below freezing than above it, as you can see from our record minimum temperatures. And then, like I said, rime ice secretion, you can see from the picture here as well, is something that we deal with quite regularly. Um, that 6 to 9 inches, not really a record or anything. We don't necessarily keep track of rime ice like that, but that just shows you, some of the higher rates of accretion of rime ice can be pretty dramatic, 6 to 9 inches per hour there. So that's sort of the extreme conditions that we're talking about and provides opportunity to study it in a pretty unique environment. All right, so that was a little bit about the observatory and about the extreme weather and whatnot, just to kind of set the stage here to talk a little bit more about the program. So this is why you're all logged on this evening. Our undergraduate and graduate adventure programs. And this program is really meant to be an immersive or provide immersive experiences relating to atmospheric science in some way, again, in this environment that I was just sort of describing. Um, so we want to anchor everything in atmospheric science and meteorology, of course, because that's the core of our mission and expertise. But we're also interested in linking this work to other sciences as well, as I'm sure you all know. I'm sure you all have some sort of either link to science or science background or deep science knowledge. Making those links across scientific disciplines is hugely valuable and important. So we definitely want to explore doing that as well through this program. We have different sorts of adventures that are designed for students at all levels. It's in the name, right? Undergraduate and graduate adventure programs. And so we've sort of come up with this framework, which I'm going to share with you in a little bit here, that will sort of give options for students at all those different levels. And again, these are meant to be unique experiences and also hands-on experiences as well. So we want students to, get a, use that instrumentation, open up the guts of it, see how it works, do some actual real-world forecasting, record a mock radio show or something along those lines, lead some real-time weather discussions that have real-world implications, those sorts of things. There's a lot of different unique hands-on experiences that we think we can provide with this program. And I think one of the other points I want to make, which hopefully will come across through the rest of the presentation as well, is the customizability We have this framework that we've come up with, but even within that framework, we really want to tailor these experiences to, further the classroom goals or the research goals, or the curricular goals that you already have. So we want it to fit well into your class, to your department, to your school, whatever it may be, wherever you are, coming from this evening. And the other thing I'll stress too, sort of throughout this presentation this evening as well, is the support that we can offer. I talked a little bit about the expertise of our staff a couple of slides ago, and that expertise is deep. It's on staff, but we also have a scientific advisory committee that advises on all of our research. We have connections with many local professors and researchers and other scientific organizations that can all be potential resources and support mechanisms for any of these adventure programs. All right, so first talking about the goals for the undergraduate level, excuse me. So these again are all meant to be, hands-on experiences for students in an exciting environment. I talked a little bit before about the exciting environment that Mount Washington can provide. Regular access to extreme weather. That can be very meaningful and really bring the classroom concepts, to life for students. So that's the goal here. And like I said before, enhancing existing classroom goals that you already have, through these practical real world applications, or participation in meaningful research projects that's supported by the expertise that the observatory team can provide. We want to take the concepts and the exercises learned in the classroom and see how they're applied in the real world, right? In an operational, day-to-day, day-to-day operational environment, right? So we can provide that for you. And introduce some problem-solving tools and methods that are used by professionals. It's one thing to, again, learn it in the classroom and get familiar with the concepts. Of course, that's super important to have that foundation, but then to take that and apply it, I think we can all sort of attest to the fact that it can be a very different animal. So that's sort of the exciting part of what we can provide. Again, is that spirit of problem solving in a real world environment, on the job. And then again, like I said, we want to customize this. What additional goals, as you envision this kind of experience for your students or for your research, what additional goals would you add here? There could be many. Um, it could be something as simple as, if you have an annual field trip as part of your class or part of your club, take that annual field trip to the observatory and work with us to define what that looks like. Maybe you have an existing classroom activity that you think could be beneficial if you were to cap that activity off with some sort of experiment on the summit of Mount Washington. Test out a classroom concept that you may be learning, that students may be learning in their courses, and cap that off with sort of an experiment on top of Mount Washington in some sort of unique environmental condition. These are all sort of additional goals that you could have as you start to think about what this may look like for you and for your program. And for graduate level goals, and again, this is certainly meant to be a spectrum or a gradient, if you will. So it's not to say that the goals are one for undergraduate and one for graduate, but this kind of gives you sort of both ends of the spectrum here. I think for graduate level goals, it's really focused certainly a little bit more on the research side of things. Contribution to ongoing either university research projects or projects that we have ongoing at the observatory, or some sort of combination of the two. So that's sort of where we're going with this, and participation in field work in, again, an exciting, extreme environment, and interaction and guidance from real world research professionals. So learning alongside with either observers that are performing and already doing certain research in certain realms, or maybe it's piggybacking on a larger project that's sort of been ongoing for years in the observatory, where we're looking to explore new avenues, and it may fit and align nicely with some kind of classroom or research goal that you have with your program. And inserting your goals here. So, maybe it's testing out classroom developed hypotheses. Maybe you need a real world laboratory, essentially, that Mount Washington conditions can mimic. Maybe it's something like that, or conducting a segment of an ongoing research project, like I mentioned before, at the observatory. We have lots of different ongoing research projects happening, whether it's with snow to liquid ratio analyses, rain on snow events, which are becoming more and more an area of interest and focus, certainly in the East. As we all know, the past couple Decembers have seen an increase in those sorts of events. Things like lapse rates, research on instrumentation. We have data coming in constantly, and for the last 90 years of temperature, things like temperature, visibility, precipitation, and of course climate change effects as well, which is always an area of interest. So those are some different areas that you may be able to envision your program fitting in with, just for some suggestions. And so this, sort of sums up, I think, what we're trying to get out here. What makes this program sort of stand out is, access to all these different resources that the observatory can provide. Obviously, our observers and our additional science and research staff, I harped a lot on expertise already. So there is a lot of expertise and support mechanisms that are possible with these adventure programs. Of course, our 90-year data set as well. So we have a 90-year data set at the summit of Mount Washington as a point, but also we do have regional data in the White Mountains area with our mesonet. That doesn't quite go back 90 years. That's newer, but that data does exist, and it is starting to build out as well. So we have data going up and down the Mount Washington Auto Road for a vertical profile, going back 20 plus years. We have data at regional mountaintop locations around the White Mountains for comparison. So there's lots of different iterations of the data set here that we may be able to utilize. We have infrastructure in place to collect data already. So that's a potential resource as well that can certainly be a barrier in other remote locations. We have instruments as well. We have instruments collecting that data. So you can think of a resource. And of course, our ongoing research projects. And of course, mimicking the extreme environmental conditions on Mount Washington, in an environment where outside it's uncontrolled, but we have a fairly well climate controlled building on the inside, protected from those conditions. It's a great place to kind of think of as a natural laboratory there. So really, the point of this is just to say, the observatory's resources can really give a boost to what you may be already trying to accomplish in the classroom. All right, so next segment of this, I'm going to go through and walk through some specific options, the framework with which we're working within. You can find all this information too on our website as well. So you don't feel the need to necessarily scribble everything down, all the details. I'll provide the link to the website at the end here. And if I didn't mention it before, I am recording this webinar as well, so that will be a resource that you'll be able to access. So you'll be able to share with other interested folks as well. So I'll just go through these different options again. This will hopefully start to make the abstract seem a little bit more tangible as I go through the options here and what the structure could look like. Excuse me one second. So I'll walk through those and we'll go from there. And one thing to notice as we kind of walk through these different options is you'll note, the different level of commitment and specificity increasing as we go through the different categories. That's one thing to kind of look out for there. All right, so starting off here with the first category of adventure, this is called Tropical Storm category, Classroom Connections. And again, we're starting broad, we're starting general, we're starting smaller commitment. So for classroom connections, this is just sort of meant to be an introduction to sort of core concepts of atmospheric science, sort of basic insights into forecasting, research, and instrumentation, things like that. So this could take a couple of forms. This could be a guest lecturer coming to your classroom and talking for an hour about forecasting in a real world environment. It could be just about more about Mount Washington and why it sees such extreme weather and some of the atmospheric factors and topographic factors that sort of contribute to that. Or it could be a distance learning program. Perhaps it's one of our weather observers connecting to your class from live from the summit and talking through what it's like to be a weather observer, the challenges that they face as an observer. It could be one that's a little bit more tailored to the ecology of the White Mountains, or it could be tailored to data collection and instrumentation. There's some possibilities there as far as what that distance learning program could look like, but it would be sort of a real live connection with a summit weather observer. So that's sort of the baseline of sort of where we're starting for a more broad level approach. You don't even need to lead, you or your students don't even need to leave your classroom for this one. But for the rest of them, you pretty much you do. So we'll start with adventure category one, called Explore Meteorology in Action. This starts to be a little bit of a deeper dive. This takes the form of an in-depth weather station tour, and this occurs at the Summit Weather Station. So if you know anything about the observatory, we do offer tours to the public in the summertime. But those are pretty broad. So this weather station tour would be much more specific. We'd really dive more into the specifics of the science behind the meteorology on Mount Washington, the science behind and the process behind weather forecasting, the technology behind the instrumentation and the data collection on top of Mount Washington, the processes behind maintenance and data quality controlling. Those are all things we can dig in a little bit more to the details on. We could walk through a real forecast, for instance, or do a demonstration of the process of what it looks like to collect precipitation, or just take a weather observation and code it and send it to the National Weather Service. So that's sort of your category one, um, your category one adventure category there. Sorry, got a little off track there. Next one is your adventure category two. And again, you'll notice higher level of commitment here. So with this one, we're advancing meteorological expertise. This is a more immersive experience. We're diving a little bit deeper and getting a little bit more specific with category two as well. So this is where we would work with you to figure out, all right, where do you want to specify it a little bit more? Do we want to dive a little bit more into the forecasting side of things, a little bit more into the broadcasting, or into the instrumentation? So again, this is where we work with you to customize the experience a little bit more based on what your classroom or what your research is really trying to do. And this takes the form of an overnight summit adventure. So this again is at the Summit Weather Station, and includes, 3 to 5 hours of hands-on learning while you're on that overnight, through different presentations and interactive sessions, with the Summit Weather Observer. This could be some of those interactive sessions could be learning a little bit more about, again, why Mount Washington sees such extreme weather. Going through the forecasting process step by step, going through forecast verification. So maybe it's walking through a forecast on day one and then day two, seeing how it verified and kind of working through what that looks like in a practical environment. The basics of the science of winter storms or science of New England storms and what that looks like from from folks that have experience, years of experience forecasting for those sorts of events. So this is really where we start to get immersive, talking about spending a night on the summit. And then of course you have those 3 to 5 hours of that practical experience, but you also will be in this operational environment for the night. So you'll pick up and your students will pick up more. absolutely, as they see what's happening. Meals are provided for this sort of summit adventure. You be, living for the night in our comfortable living quarters, which are heated and sort of have all the comforts of home. It's pretty, yeah, it's a pretty comfortable environment for the top of a for the top of such an extreme mountain. And of course, you're gonna see some really cool things. It's gonna be a cool experience being on top of Mount Washington. Sunrises, sunsets, high winds, low winds, undercast. These are all things that you may experience in just one summit overnight. Category three, this starts to get a little bit more advanced, and then again, like is specified here. We would work with you to figure out where we want to focus things in a little bit more. Maybe it's more advanced forecasting techniques. Maybe it's diving a little bit more into the broadcast side. Maybe it's taking more of a peek into the technology side of things and comparing and contrasting our instrumentation and if there's a breakage in real time or some sort of troubleshooting in real time, maybe it's, observing and or assisting observers with instrumentation maintenance, something along those lines. But this category three, this is a week-long summit immersion. So with this category, you're on the summit for a week, living and working alongside the meteorologist. So we're taking it from one night and we're blowing it up to a week here. And again, similar to that overnight summit adventure experience, but really spreading that out over a much longer period of time. You're going to have a lot more experience, a lot more opportunity, participating again in some practical sessions and some workshops with the observers in that theme that we sort of work to customize for you. And creating some meaningful deliverables from this as well. If students are working on a quick project for the week, there'll be some sort of a deliverable there. If they're focused on broadcasting, maybe they're developing a professional reel of broadcasting or for broadcasting purposes. So that could be something that they come away with. Maybe they're creating a bunch of higher summits weather forecasts. So there's a lot of different ways you could go with this one. A week is a long time. Our weeks, if I didn't mention before, our weeks are Wednesday to Wednesday. So that's sort of what that would look like. And then again, having the experience of being immersed in this environment for a week and really seeing, peeking behind the curtain of what it looks like and what it feels like to be in an operational meteorological environment. All right, and then moving on to category four. So this is sort of the upper limit of more of the educational offerings. Um, And again, here we'd really customize things and focus in. This is a multi-week opportunity. So this would be multiple weeks at the Summit Weather Station. Again, we'd separate that out, but we'd work with schedules to figure out how that would work best based on our schedule and based on your schedule. Again, we generally work week on, week off schedules. Depending on the season, transportation up and down the mountain is limited. So we are limited by that transportation schedule, but we'd work with you to figure out what would work best for the goals you're trying to accomplish and the scale at which we're talking. And for this, you do an intensive focus study over multiple weeks. You have close mentorship, or your students would have close mentorship with a meteorologist, with our scientific advisory committee, and we're really starting to dive more into the research side of things with category four. So really identifying an ongoing project that could be accomplished in a period of time, or at least partially of a period of time spent on the summit. And again, that could be something unique, or that could be something that's ongoing that you or your students would sort of contribute to at the observatory or within whatever research projects may be going on. And so again, there are plenty of mechanisms for support and lots of expertise um, to fall back on for guidance through this experience. And then finally, we arrive at category five. And this is where things get, really exciting, where your students or you or your students, could lead significant and original research. This is a very immersive, this is a multi-month experience. This is akin to our internship program, but obviously it would be covered on through the and designed under the framework of the university or of the school. It's a little bit different, but that's probably the best approximation that I have for something like this, where students would just we'd work with students to design and execute a specific project of their choice. Um, and they'd have mentorship by our scientific advisory committee that would check in from week to week just to provide guidance, provide feedback, provide direction and focus with whatever they may be researching or wherever their topic or their data analysis may be going. As I'm sure you all know, as you deep dive more into a research project, you open up 20, 30 more questions. So our scientific advisory committee would sort of help to focus things and directions on where you go as the research project progresses and what questions should be left for future projects or other researchers. And opportunities to present whatever findings as well to peers, to professionals, and even potentially at conferences, as they may come and go. Those are all opportunities that would be unlocked with this experience. And plenty of opportunity through the observatory's networks to engage with visiting scientists, with industry professionals, again, utilizing the resources of the observatory to the fullest. And again, this is a multi-month experience. It doesn't mean you would be on the summit for 2, 3 months straight. Again, we would harbor that week on, week off schedule or some iteration of that. Um, in order to make a manageable work schedule. But that also means that work can continue while off the summit. Data analysis can certainly happen. It doesn't necessarily always need to happen at the summit weather station. So this could fit within a larger schedule, larger framework with bits of time, on top of Mount Washington when it's most strategic, whether it's for data collection, whether it's for more time with the weather observers for guidance or something along those lines, or for a particular weather event that we may be looking to study a little bit more through this research. So we could be strategic about that. Again, we do have certain restrictions on when we can travel and how often we can travel. So that is a very big constraint, which we'll talk about here in a second. But there is some options for flexibility in there. All right, so this is sort of a summary of all those different structure adventure options, if you will, that I just went through. And again, different levels of commitment, different levels of depth with each individual category. So as the category sort of increases, as you see, the level of commitment and the depthfulness or the deeper dive, the more specificity we're really talking about as we go from tropical storm category up to category 5. And I also want to emphasize too that, multiple options, it's not necessarily a pick one and that's it. Multiple options can work together, whether for one project, for one class, for one program, or for one school. Um, so we're definitely interested in exploring opportunities where we combine multiple categories with your class or with your program. Maybe a certain subset of students are coming to, the summit for that summit visit, one-time weather station tour, but then a certain subset of those students are staying for the overnight. That sort of thing. So we can mix and match approaches here to fit under this, kind of bigger, advance this further partnership and further goals that we're looking to accomplish. And that's really what we want to look at this as a partnership with you and your school. That's really at the end of the day that the goal here. Now, availability. So this one is important, of course. When can we arrange for you to come? That's a great logistical question. So like I said, I've hinted at these already, and I'm sure you can imagine as well. There's a few constraints with such a remote environment. Of course, transportation is one of the biggest ones, especially depending on the time of year. Wintertime transportation is not trivial. It is complicated. There are days where we simply cannot travel up or down the road. There are days where we anticipate being able to travel, but don't end up making it up or down the road. Those are all factors that we consider. Um, so, those are the when we start to hopefully take the next steps with you and talk about the specifics, those are going to be some of the factors that we're going to be considering. So just as a heads up there, and space limitations as well. The Summit Weather Station, it's not a huge facility, so we can only fit a certain amount of people. Certainly, for things like overnights, space limitations are a factor we have to consider. We have weather observers and interns living and working up there. We also have other overnight guests and programs that spend overnights as well. So again, those are all the factors that we're considering into this larger puzzle. And winter really is the most restrictive purely because of transportation, purely because getting up and down the road is a process in the winter. So all it is to say, this is a first come first served basis. So I definitely recommend that if you're interested, to reach out to us sooner rather than later and start having that conversation, so we can start planning things. And maybe it's this year. Hopefully it's this year. If it fills up, maybe it's early next year. So there's plenty of opportunity there though. And I want to emphasize too, there's opportunities year round. We talk a lot about, and I spent a lot of time this evening harping on the wintertime conditions on top of Mount Washington. But we have extreme weather, throughout the year. Whether it's, we have a good amount of thunderstorms and high windstorms and hailstorms in the summertime. That's definitely something that we see, ice storms, things like that in the shoulder seasons. So, while winter gains the most headlines, rightfully so on Mount Washington, but there are other opportunities, and there's opportunities even when the environment isn't at its most extreme. So that's certainly something to consider too. Whether it's looking at things like air quality or lapse rates or things like that. There's lots of opportunity. And the other thing too on this slide, which you'll see on the bottom here, I've talked a little bit about the seasons on Mount Washington. They look a little bit different on the summit than in most places, as I'm sure you can imagine. Our winters are long. Um, our falls are shorter, and our summers are shorter still. Summers really, just 2.5 months maybe. Winters are, at least 5 months. And spring, we like to say, lasts maybe a couple weeks on Mount Washington, and then all of a sudden we make this dramatic transition to summer. So let's just give you an indication of when I'm talking about seasons, exactly what I mean by that. All right, so talking about actions and next steps here. So again, this sort of gives you, this is meant to be a gradient. You may be outside of this, you may be somewhere in the middle, totally fine. This just, kind of gives some, gives you some guidance as to, where to go from here. Maybe you're in a situation where this sounds interesting, but I need more information. I need more time to figure things out. Totally fine. My main question then is how can we help? Um, the options are on our website, so that's a resource for you if you want to discuss within your department. If you want to set a follow-up meeting with us just to talk out, more specifics, what your vision is, and want to help take that vision and bring it out of the abstract and into the tangible, we can help you do that. And then, of course, emailing us with any questions you have. If you're like me and you think of 5 different questions after you get off a call, our email is there for you to follow up with us. Um, Maybe you're interested, but it's not solely your decision, depending on what your role is within your school. Discuss it more. Discuss within your department, talk to your advisors, and feel free to refer us to any decision makers. So if you want us to connect directly with folks whose decision it could be to implement a program like this, we're happy to chat with them. Or maybe you're in the position where you're ready, this sounds awesome, let's talk next steps, then let's set up a meeting. We can brainstorm ideas again to make things, to talk about the customizability, the schedule, make things a little bit more tangible, talk about areas of discipline and focus that we may want to focus on, discuss again those multi-pronged approaches, and develop a contract and a partnership. We do have a sort of a template contract there to develop that partnership with you and your school. So we have that ready to go. So if you're all in and you're ready to go, we're certainly happy to take those next steps with you. All right, so here's some resources for you. And again, this slideshow, I'll make this available too. I'll follow up to the list here of folks who attended with a link to this slideshow. So um, certainly take a screenshot if you want or scribble it down, but you won't lose out on your chance. I'll also make this webinar recording as well accessible too, which I'll add those links in after this is done. And then again, if you want to follow up with us, contact us there at research@mountwashington.org. That's where you can get your questions answered, and if you're ready to go, where you may be able, where we can, start talking, setting up meetings, that sort of thing, to dig in on what the partnership could ultimately look like. All right. So at that point, I think I've talked enough here. So at this point, I would love to open it up to questions. We do have a Q&A component to the webinar here. So if you want to ask any questions, definitely open to it. Just feel free to jot those questions down in the Q&A tab, and happy to answer them. And if you do have questions about specific slides, want me to go back and show different slides, if you want to reference them in a question, I can certainly do that as well. Just let me know. All right. So first question here, which I'll just answer them live. How many people are up at the summit station at a time? Great question. So we have anywhere from say 6 to 9 people staffing the summit weather station at a time. Year round, we have 3 weather observers. 2 work during the day, 1 work at night. But then, depending on the time of year, we also have a couple interns up with us, anywhere from 1 in the fall to 3 in the summertime per shift. This is. And then we usually have a couple volunteers that are up for the week. The volunteers are there to help support the staff in any way needed, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. So that's generally what a full crew looks like. Other questions about the observatory, about the venture programs, about other resources? I'll give folks another minute or two to type in any questions. I know I threw a lot of information at you all this evening. So again, if you have a question, go ahead and hit that Q&A button and you can type in your questions there. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions here, or any additional questions in the chat. So again, what I will do before we call it an evening here, is I'm going to share my screen again. And again, if you do have a question that pops up as I'm resharing this, please feel free to type it in. But I will share again this slide with you, depending on where where you're falling right now. These are sort of some suggested next steps. So again, I emphasize if when in doubt, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And you can reach out to us with this email, research@mountwashington.org. Also, I emailed most of you with a reminder about this webinar, so you have my email address. You can also use that too. That's just my name, mcarmen at mountwashington.org. You can feel free to reach out to me directly there as well. And again, I'll make the webinar recording and the slideshow available to you all in any follow-up emails, so you will be able to access that. And I'd also encourage you as well, if you do know of other folks that may be interested in your department or in your school, uh, don't hesitate to share the slideshow, share the link, share the website, share the email with them as well. We're happy to talk about that. Looks like we just got another question come in here. Could you tell us more about the other organizations you work with, like the Avalanche Center? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mount Washington Observatory, we have a lot of different partners that we partner on different things, different projects with, research projects, also operations as well. The Avalanche Center, the Mount Washington Avalanche Center, is one of those organizations. We partner with them in a number of different ways. We actually right now have a joint internship happening with the Avalanche Center. So we have a summit intern who works 1 week with us on the summit and then 1 week at the Avalanche Center on their off weeks and back and forth. It's a good way to bridge the gap between two organizations whose missions align, but touch in different realms. Weather forecasters and meteorology and snow science are two very different disciplines and operationally as we're finding out more and more. Um, so that's an interesting one there. But yeah, but the Avalanche Center, we also partner with the Appalachian Mountain Club as well. That's another organization that we have a long-standing history with. We partner with them for internships as well as research projects too. We have a strong partnership with Plymouth State University as well, through joint internships, programs, research projects, that sort of thing. And yeah, so that's sort of a sampling of some of the organizations that we partner with. There's definitely a longer list. We partner with some radio stations as well. We partner with some even outdoor gear companies, as you can see right here from my EMS logo, to do product testing. We do product testing, with lots of different organizations that are looking to test the limits of their state-of-the-art instrumentation. So yeah, the list is long. Great. Well, let's see if there's no other questions, which I'll give one last call for those. Um, So I'll drag out my outro here in case you do have one last question. But thank you all for joining this evening. Again, if you do have any questions after we get off the webinar here, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at research@mountwashington.org. Again, to talk options, to talk about, again, we really want to look at this as the start of a partnership with your school, and we realize those things take time. So certainly, even if you're, not quite sure, or if you are sure but you think the answer isn't now or next year, reach out. Let's chat. Um, like I said, those slots will start to fill up pretty quickly, especially in the winter time. So it's better to get you on the schedule well ahead of time than wait a little bit longer. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining this evening. I think we'll wrap it up there since I don't see any other questions here. Thanks again for your time, and enjoy the rest of your evenings, and we hope to hear from you all soon.